Hi there, it's Fred Sweet. Welcome to Guitar Media's Fender 30 amp video. We're here today to take a look at this 1981 Fender 30 amp in the two 10-inch speaker configuration. This amplifier still retains its original CTS 10-inch speakers, but to play it safe and not blow the speakers, we just don't use them. We do play the amp pretty loud. We use the Jensens in the 412 cabinet beside me. They're each running somewhere in between 3 and 4 watts a piece. We use the chrome domes for the humbuckers because they're typically a little brighter, and we use the non-chrome domes for recording the Fender guitars to help smooth out some of the overdriven tones. We run this amplifier on a Variac somewhere just over 110 volts and with a total of a 4 ohm speaker load. Our total speaker configuration consists of 6 speakers. The late 60s Jensen C12N with the chrome dome, the 1970 Jensen C15N with the square magnet. We also have a 1965 Jensen C12Q in the 412, a mid-50s P12P, as well as these unusual Jensen Olsen bass speakers with chrome domes. we first got this amp, we heard somewhat of a loud hum coming from the amplifier, and after taking the chassis out and taking a look under the hood, we noticed that the master volume was a little loose. And eventually this actually caused one of the solder joints and one of the wires to just come loose a little bit. So we did a little solder touch up there. We ran the amp, and while running the amp, we took a wooden stick through and sort of tapped around. And after tapping around on all the capacitors, we were able to find another capacitor that had actually jiggled loose on one end. And this capacitor was dangerously close to the top panel shielding inside the cabinet, but someone had actually put a piece of electrical tape to avoid a possible short. While this is a 2-channel amp, we only use the reverb channel, and with the humbuckers, it was very straightforward. We basically just turned everything on 10. So dialing in the settings for the Fender guitars is a little bit more complicated. We like to go with 2 different styles of sounds and settings here. And it's basically the boost setting, which is more overdrive. And then the clean setting is essentially when we disengage the boost. It's typically more often when we're using the reverb, we like to go for the no boost setting, which is the cleaner sound. So for the boost setting, we use the preamp gain on 10 with the boost engaged, the treble boost engaged. However, we leave the treble down to help keep the overdriven tones smoother with the Fender guitars. We do use the mid-range boost and the mid-range on 10. This helps us with our sustain and response with the Fender guitars. And then we do not use the bass boost, as we find that using the bass boost gives us kind of a muddy overdrive. And so we leave the bass on 1 and we do not use the bass boost. However, when we disengage all the boost and we go for the reverb tone, a lot of times we find ourselves dialing up the bass or the treble up about halfway, and this sort of fills out the sound and give it a little bit more of a sparkle and a chime for our reverb settings. After having the honor of playing a 1954 Fender Super Amp, and this is before they incorporated the use of the tone stack, which we all know and love, evolved into the Marshall amplifier. Also having the honor to play a 1954 Fender Bandmaster, which was the very first tone stack amplifier, and also having the honor to play a 1954 Fender Tweed Twin, which is the low power Tweed Twin. I sit before you to say that this would be my favorite studio amplifier. So after owning and playing tube guitar amps ranging anywhere from 5 watts all the way up to 200 watts, I found that for my personal use, somewhere in between 10 watts and 35 watts to be my favorite wattage range. And also personally, I like AB amplifiers because the AB amplifier incorporates the use of 2 output tubes, and this type of phase inverter, to my ears, has more pleasing overdriven tones for output tube breakup. This amplifier has inspired me to share my views on guitar tones as a whole. With Fender's invention of the tone stack in the mid-50s that would eventually become the 59 Bassman, we all know Jim Marshall would use this circuit design to invent the Marshall amplifier that in 66 or 67, sometime right in there, they would go to the EL34s, and really, the EL34s really changed and formed the sound of rock along with the invention of the 100-watt super lead, and just iconic rock and roll tones history was made with this setup. And really, this setup, the overdrive, the gain structure of this setup just was found to be more useful in music. And so basically what would happen is we would go to more of an aggressive type tone. So the JCM 800, with the invention of the JCM 800, actually started with the 2203 in 1976. What they would do is actually cascade the gain stages of the first preamp tube, and this led to much more of a brighter type sound, a thinner type tone. And see what happens with overdrive. So basically, if you could just imagine, okay, an amplification system, as the gain increases, the bass also increases. So this is why it was so important for the tone to become more mid-range and treble, because as the gain was increasing, the bass was increasing. So what happens is when you have too much bass, this creates an amount of compression that actually it eventually folds over. And so when you strike the string, instead of the sound coming out, an overly compression means that the sound is going to drop. So that's why they drop the bass out of the sound. It's so that when the guitar player hits the chord with the high gain, we still hear the sound coming out and not an overly compressed type tone. So this actually led to high gain heavy metal applications, and eventually these sounds would actually go into transistor units and transistor amplifiers and what I like to call the modern metal tone. Well, so eventually this sound and all these sounds would then be modeled in digital modeling amplifier setups. And the reason why I'm going over all of these tones as a whole is this amplifier actually finds itself much more at the beginning of the invention of the tone stack and that type of sound that is very bass and very round and with a lot of compression, and for a couple of reasons. And the two main reasons being that this amplifier runs on a low voltage, much like the original low-power Tweed Twin and the amplifiers in the mid-50s when the tone stack was first invented. So that's one of the main reasons. And the other main reasons is the use of the Jensen speakers. Because Fender used Jensen speakers in the mid-50s with the invention of the tone stack, and the fact that we still use them today, and also the use of Fender guitars such as the Stratocaster and the Telecaster were also produced in the mid-50s. This leaves the end result to be very close to the original sound of the original tone stack. This amplifier also does incorporate the use of a tube rectifier. And once again, this brings us right back to the original tone stack sound of the mid-50s. And by this time in 1981, we don't see the use of a tube rectifier in hardly any amps, as the evolution of music has really gone away from that. And with rock and roll and now even heavy metal, just coming out right around that time. And, well, really Black Sabbath started it all, I think, in 1970, or 69. But anyways, back to the tube rectifier. So the thing you have to understand here, and I don't think, honestly, until I owned and played this amplifier, I myself even got it. And though it had been explained to me many, many times by many amp techs in the past. So tube rectifier, okay, so if you could just imagine, the capacitors in your amplifier are charging a voltage. So what happens when you strike a chord on the guitar, that voltage is then comes out of the capacitor and goes through your transformers, comes out the speaker, you hear the sound, boom, just like that. Well, within, a fraction of a second, the amplifier's already, all the caps in the amplifier are trying to recharge within a fraction of a second of you hitting that chord. And what happens here is with a diode rectifier, we have what I would consider to be an ample power supply. So, there's plenty of power there for the caps to recharge and the power just keeps going. Whereas with a tube rectifier, we notice a dramatic drop in voltage. So what happens here is this is really far out, but when you have the amp turned up a lot to where the output tubes draw all the current, then we notice that not only the voltage is dropping in the output stage of the amplifier and your overall volume either stays the same or actually momentarily drops in a compression type state. We've also noticed with this amplifier in an extreme situation, because this is a high gain amplifier, it's actually noticeable in the front end. So what happens is when the voltage drops in the front end of the amplifier, which is the preamp, you can hear the sound of the overdrive actually degrading. So it turns into a very bad sounding overdrive. And of course, we're talking about an extreme situation, because normally you just don't play the gain that high or that much bass to get that amount of compression, because that's basically a drop in volume. We don't look for a drop in volume. We try to avoid that. However, a nice compression is nice, especially when you play cleaner. It definitely helps to round out the sound, fill out the sound, and actually you can hear the guitar better, more full, more clear with a nice amount of compression. Understanding how voltages affect the sound in tube amplifiers. If you could picture an Ampeg SVT running, say, 700-800 volts on the plates of the tubes in the amp, okay, so high voltage equals a clean sound and a dynamic sound, and that's why bass players and typically bass amps like Ampeg SVTs are extremely high voltage, and they're also way up in the hundreds of watts. And yeah, they're more powerful. They can deliver more bass and more dynamics. Okay, so low voltages. So what low voltages equal for tubes is more of an overdrive type sound. And however, this is awesome for guitar players that want to get overdrive. There is a point of no return. So this is kind of a fine line right here. So if you could imagine, okay, the lower the voltage, the faster the waveform clips. So this actually equals more compression and more of a muddy type overdrive. And for lack of better adjectives, so as the voltage increases, we get somewhat of a, I don't know that smoother is necessarily the word, but tighter definitely. The tube starts becoming more dynamic, less compression, and it's able to actually create a larger waveform without clipping, so it has more headroom. Thanks for watching, and check our channel for our latest videos.